Most farm stories are about what you put into the ground. This one is about what the ground put back. October, rural Georgia. Last row of the season. The machine stops. Michael looks into the furrow and finds something that, for the next 3 days, he cannot explain, cannot share, and cannot walk away from. The quiet farm he has worked for 20 years is not quiet anymore. This is what happened. My name is Samuel Hostetler. I farm in LaGrange County, Indiana, and I am not the man in this story. I have never set foot in Georgia, but I have sat with the man who lived it, on his porch, with a jar of tea, sweating a ring onto the arm of the chair. And he told it to me slow, the way a man tells a thing he has already told himself 100 times in the dark. So I am going to hand it to you the way he handed it to me. I will not dress it up. And I will tell you plainly along the way what he got right, what he got wrong, and what I would have done different. Because there is a piece of real knowing buried in the middle of this story, and I do not want you to walk past it. His name is Michael. He is 54 years old. He has 410 acres in the southern part of the state, sand under the topsoil, pine on 3 sides, and a house his grandfather framed in 1948 with lumber cut off the back of the place. And in October of that year, Michael was in trouble. Not the dramatic kind, the slow kind, the kind that most farming families know by heart. The spring hay had drowned. 11 inches of rain in 9 days in May, and the second cutting came off the field, black and sour and worth about 1/3 of nothing. The peanut ground did all right, but all right does not fill a hole that deep. He had a note at the credit association, $18,400, due the 15th of November. And in September, a young man in a clean truck with a clipboard had come out from a company that leases farmland for solar arrays and offered him $3,100 an acre per year on the 40 acres nearest the county road. That 40 acres is the field this story happens in. Michael had the papers in the kitchen drawer under the seed catalogs where you put a thing you do not want to look at. His wife's name is Delia. She drives a school bus, Route 14, out and back twice a day, and she has been doing it 11 years because a bus route in that county comes with insurance, and a farm does not. She is the one who kept saying, honest and plain, that $3,100 an acre would clear the note and keep the rest of the place. And Michael kept saying he would think on it, which is what a man says when he cannot say no and will not say yes. So that is the man. Not a man having an adventure, a man carrying a bill. Now, the last week of October, he was digging a little patch of Irish potatoes he had put in the first week of August, a fall crop, maybe 2/3 of an acre, the kind of thing a farmer plants for his own table and for the neighbors and to keep his hand in. A hurricane had come up the Gulf 10 days before and thrown the tail of itself across South Georgia, 4 inches in a night, and the sand had gone soft and heavy. He tried the walk-behind machine first. It bogged twice, sputtered, kicked sideways in the mud, and quit. He said a word he would not say in front of the bus route, set the machine at the end of the row, and went and got the shovel with the handle worn thin in the middle from 3 generations of hands. He dug by hand for an hour and a half. He was in the last row, 12 feet from the fence row, when the shovel went in and did not make the sound it had been making all morning. Not the wet crunch of a spud cut in half. Not the ring of a rock. A dull knock. Hollow. Like tapping the side of a full jar with your fingernail. He stopped with his hands still on the handle. Then he got down on one knee in the wet sand and brushed with the side of his glove, and a curve came up out of the dirt. Pale. Round. About the size of a ping-pong ball, a little bigger, and not brown enough to be a potato, and not gray enough to be a stone. He brushed wider. There was another, and another, under that. 6 of them, sitting in a shallow bowl of loose sand about 6 inches down, not scattered, not jumbled, laid in close against each other, the way you would set eggs into a carton if you were being careful. And the first thought that went through his head was snakes. That is the honest thing, and I want to keep it in, because it is what most of you would think too. Down there you have rat snakes and king snakes and corn snakes and coach whips, and after a hard rain they move. He has nieces who come out in the summer and run that field barefoot like it is the last free country on earth. So his first feeling was not wonder, it was dread. He sat back on his heels and looked at them a long while, and the longer he looked, the less sense they made to him. Snake eggs down there are leathery. You press one, and it dents, and stays dented, like a soft grape, and they are usually longer than they are wide, and they are usually stuck together in a clump like wet clay under a board or a rotten log or a hay bale, in the cool and the dark. These were not leathery. He touched one with a gloved finger, careful as a man touching a hot stove, and it gave a hair and came back. It was hard the way a hen egg is hard. And they were nearly round, and they were in the open middle of a plowed field in full October sun, in sand 6 inches down, and there was nothing above them but sky. That was the first thing he could not explain, and it was the right thing to be stuck on, because the answer was sitting in that difference the whole time. He got up and walked the field. He looked for a shed skin. He looked for a track. He looked at the fence row and did not really see it, and I want you to remember that, because the fence row is where the answer had been living for longer than Michael had been alive. He found nothing. He walked back to the house with sand, drying gray on his knees, and he looked over his shoulder twice on the way, which is a thing grown men do not admit to, and every one of us has done. Now here is where I want to slow down, because this is the part of the story that is worth money to somebody watching this. Michael did what you would do. He went in the kitchen, washed the mud off his hands, and opened the laptop on the table where his mother's gingham curtains still hang in the window. And he typed in snake eggs, Georgia. And he sat there for 40 minutes scrolling pictures, and every picture was a little wrong. Wrong shape, wrong shell, wrong place. And every wrong picture made his chest tighter instead of looser. Because a man alone with a question will always fill the empty part with the worst thing he can think of. Then he got up and went to the corner shelf where his mother's books lean on each other like tired shoulders. She had been a school teacher and a woman who could name every bird that crossed the yard, and she had a row of field guides with the spines gone soft. He pulled down the one on reptiles, and it fell open near the middle, the way an old book will fall open at the place somebody used to go. There on the right-hand page were the eggs out of his field, round, white, hard-shelled, 2 inches across, near enough. And under them, a name he had heard his whole life and never once put together with an animal. Gopher tortoise. He said it out loud in the empty kitchen. Because down there that is not a fancy word. Old folks in that county do not say tortoise, they say gopher. That hole in the fence row is a gopher hole. That is a gopher. Michael had heard the word 10,000 times and had somehow gotten to 54 years old without ever once thinking about what was at the bottom of it. And then he read the next line, which said the thing that took his knees out from under him. Protected species, and then a paragraph about penalties, and a number with a comma in it, and the words nest, destruction, and habitat designation. He closed the book. Then he opened it again and read it a second time, hoping the words would have changed, which they had not. Now I am going to stop the story right here, because I am going to be honest with you the way I promised. And the honest thing is this. Michael read that page and drew a conclusion that was wrong, and that wrong conclusion cost him 3 days of his life and very nearly cost 6 animals theirs. I will tell you exactly where the mistake was later on, at the place in the story where it does the most good. But I want you holding it in your hand from here on, because if you do not, you will spend the next 20 minutes thinking he was smart to keep quiet. He was not. He was scared. Those are not the same thing, and any man who tells you they are has never been either one. So let me tell you what he had actually found, because most folks watching this have never had it laid out plain. and it is one of the more remarkable things living under the ground in this country. The gopher tortoise is a land turtle, not a water turtle. It does not swim, and it will drown in a stock tank the same as a chicken will. It is about the size of a dinner plate when it is grown, dull brown, with front legs like little shovels, flattened and scaled, made for one job. It digs, and it does not dig a scrape. It digs a tunnel, and that tunnel will run 30 and 40 feet back into a sand ridge and drop 6, 8, 10 feet down. And it holds one steady temperature and one steady dampness all year, summer and winter, drought and flood. Here is the part that matters. That tortoise is not the only thing that lives in that hole. Biologists have counted something on the order of 350 other kinds of creature that use gopher tortoise burrows. Indigo snakes, gopher frogs, burrowing owls in some places, mice, rabbits, lizards, beetles, and enough different insects that a man could spend a career on the beetles alone. When the woods burn, which in that country they are supposed to do every few years, the hole is where everything goes, and the hole is why anything comes back. They call an animal like that a keystone species, which is an engineer's word. The plain word is landlord. That tortoise is the landlord, and everything else on that ridge rents from him. They are slow to start and slow to end. A gopher tortoise does not lay her first eggs until she is somewhere around 15 or 20 years old, and if nothing kills her, she may live 60 years, maybe more. She lays once a year, generally in the late spring, most often in May or June. 3 eggs, 6 eggs, sometimes a dozen. And here is the thing that answered Michael's question before he ever asked it. She does not hide them under a log in the cool and the dark. She lays them in the open sun, in loose sand, usually in the mound of sand thrown out at the mouth of her own burrow, which folks down there call the apron, because the sun is the incubator. There is no mother sitting on those eggs. There never was. She digs the hole, she lays, she covers, she walks off, and the sun does the rest for 80 to 100 days. That is why they were round and hard-shelled instead of leathery and long. That is why they were in the open field in the sun instead of under a board. And that is why there was no snake anywhere for Michael to find, because there was never going to be one. Now, a nest right out in the middle of a worked potato patch is unusual, and I asked him about it, and here is what he worked out later with help. 12 feet from where he was digging, in the fence row he had bush-hogged around every year of his life, there is a mound of white sand, and a hole shaped like a half moon, flat on the bottom. It has been there since before he was born. He had always figured it for an armadillo den, or he had not figured it at all, which is nearer the truth. That female had been living 12 feet off his potato row for probably 30 years. He had run a tractor past her door twice a week for 2 decades. The sand at the edge of a tilled field is looser and warmer than the pine ridge, and she had walked out into it in May and laid where the digging was easy. He had been farming on top of her the whole time. That is the sentence he kept coming back to, that evening on the porch. I have been farming on top of her the whole time. I am Samuel Hostetler. I keep a place with my wife Leah here in northern Indiana, and I have made a habit of collecting the old ways of doing things before the last of the people who know them are gone. We have some bees. We have a garden that gets away from us in August like everybody's does, and I put these talks together because the knowing that used to move from a grandmother's hands into a grandchild's hands does not move that way anymore, and somebody has to carry it across. My nephew works the camera and puts these up for me. Our bishop permits it for teaching, and I hold to that. I do have a book, and it lives at samuelhostetler.com, and I will mention it the once, and then leave it be. It is a plain book about keeping a place alive without a lot of money, and I will tell you before you spend $1 that there is a paper copy printed and bound and mailed to your door, because I have heard from too many of you that the computer version is no good to a man with a bad eye and a slow connection. And one word of caution while I am here. If you see somebody in the comments pushing some miracle book I never mentioned, that is not me, and that is not a friend of mine. I have the one book, and it lives at the one place. All right, back to the story. Michael went back out to that field with a coffee can full of dread. He crouched by the nest and he thought about what could get at it. Rain, first. Then a hoof, a boot, a tire. Then a crow. Because a crow will watch a man kneel down in a field and go back later to see what was worth kneeling for. Then his own 2 dogs. Then Douglas Tanner's cows, which were on the other side of a fence that had been sagging since the spring. So he built a fence around it. Not a good fence. He got weathered stakes out of the barn and drove 4 of them in a square around the nest, strung baling twine between them, and tied on a length of faded orange ribbon left over from a survey job in 2011. Then he stood back and looked at it, and it looked like exactly what he wanted it to look like. It looked like a man had marked off a soft spot so he would not drop a tractor wheel in it. That was day 1. He went in at dark, and he sat at the table, and Delia came in from her afternoon route. Here is where the second promise of this story starts to come due. He could not explain it. Now he found he could not share it either. She asked how the potatoes came out. He said, fine. She asked why the walk-behind was sitting at the end of the row with mud packed up under it. He said it bogged. She asked, was he all right? Because a wife of 26 years can read the back of a man's neck like a weather glass. And he said he was tired. He told me he opened his mouth twice to tell her. And both times what stopped him was not the animals and not the law. It was the drawer. It was that solar lease sitting under the seed catalogs, 3,100 an acre on the exact 40 acres that Nest was sitting in, and the note due the 15th of November, and the fact that if he said the words out loud to the one person who would want him to do the right thing, then the right thing would be decided and he would not get a vote. That is not a noble reason to keep a secret. He knows that. He said it to me himself. And he did not try to make it sound better than it was. But I have never met a man who did not at some point in his life hold a thing back from the person he loves most. Not because he was ashamed of the thing, but because he was not done arguing with himself about it, and he did not want help. So he ate his supper and said nothing, and out in the dark, 12 feet from a sagging fence, 6 eggs went on doing in the cold what they had been doing all summer in the heat, which was getting ready. Day 2 came up gray. Not raining yet, but that low, flat sky that sits down on a field like a hand on a shoulder. He walked out before the coffee was cold. The twine was where he left it. The ribbon was moving a little. No tracks he did not recognize. He got down and looked, and the sand was undisturbed, and for about 90 seconds he felt fine. Then he stood up, and there was Douglas Tanner at the fence line with his arms crossed. Douglas has the place east of him, 160 acres of mostly pasture and about 40 head. He is 61. He is not a villain. I want to say that plain because it would be easy to make him one, and it would be a lie. He is a man who has watched that piece of ground his whole life from his own porch and believes, in a way he could not defend out loud, that he is entitled to know what happens on it. Their fathers ran cattle together. Their mothers sat in the same church. And somewhere in the last 15 years it got sideways over a ditch and a right-of-way, and neither one of them can now say a friendly thing to the other without it costing him something. Morning, Michael said. Douglas did not answer right off. He shifted his weight, spat in the grass, and let the quiet sit there and do its work, which is a thing countrymen know how to do to each other. You fixing something out here, he said. Looks like you got half your field staked off. Soft spot after the storm, Michael said. Did not want to run a wheel into it. Douglas looked at the stakes a while. Then he said, don't remember that ground being soft last year. It was enough to make a mess of it, Michael said. You dig up anything, Douglas asked? And that question landed a good deal harder than Douglas meant it to, which Michael did not know at the time, and I do now. Because Douglas had his own November. He had a hay bill and a vet bill and a stretch of fence he had been meaning to pull up for 2 years, And that same young man with the clipboard had been down his road too. When he asked Michael if he had dug up anything, he was asking the only question a worried man knows how to ask, which is, has something good happened to you that did not happen to me? Mud and rock, Michael said. Nothing in that dirt but potatoes. Douglas grunted and walked off along the fence. Slow, not away, along the way a man walks when he is memorizing something. And that was the whole conversation. Nothing happened. No threat, no accusation. And Michael stood there afterward with his heart going like he had run to the mailbox because he had just lied to a neighbor over 6 eggs. And a lie is a small enough thing until you have to keep it standing up. Now, here comes the part where he did it wrong. And I am going to tell it slow, because it is the most useful part of this whole story, and it is the part every one of you would get wrong too. I would have gotten it wrong. I am fairly sure I would have gotten it worse. By noon, the radio was saying 3 to 5 inches with the front coming through overnight. Michael looked at that little bowl of sand and saw exactly what would happen to it, and he was right about that. The nest sat maybe an inch lower than the rows around it, and 2 seasons of tilling had cut a shallow run-in from the north end, and any real rain was going to be funneled straight down onto it. So here is what he did. He went and got boards and cut a run to turn the water toward the old irrigation ditch, and he took a spade and carved a shallow trench above the nest to catch what came down the slope. That part was right. That part I would tell any of you to do, and I will come back to it. Then he did 3 other things. He got a blue poly tarp out of the barn and laid it over the ground on the low side. And he pulled it in tight and weighted the edges down with river rock. And he tucked the low edge under and packed mud over it. He wanted the rain off. What he built was a lid. Sand under plastic in South Georgia in October, with the sun coming out between bands, will go warm and wet, and stay warm and wet. And eggs that have spent 100 days breathing through their shell in dry sand do not care for that at all. A tortoise egg is not a sealed jar. It breathes. It wants moving air, and it wants to be able to dry. Second thing, before he covered it, he wanted to see them one more time, and he brushed the sand back with his fingers and lifted 2 of them out and turned them over in his palm, looking for cracks, looking for damage, and he set them back down. He set them back down the wrong way up. Now hear me. In a turtle egg, within a few days of being laid, the little embryo floats up and fastens itself to the inside of the top of the shell, and it stays fastened there the whole time. Turn that egg over and you can tear it loose or you can smother it under its own yolk. There is a reason biologists mark the top of a turtle egg with a soft pencil before they ever pick one up. Michael did not know that. Almost nobody knows that. He was as gentle as a man can be, and gentle had nothing to do with it. And the third thing, he carried out a jug of water and poured about a gallon into the sand around the nest because it had been dry 3 days, and it seemed to him a growing thing ought to want water. That one, as it happened, did him no harm to speak of, and there is a rain coming in a few hours anyway. But I put it in because it is the purest example of the thing that kills more found animals in this country than cars and dogs put together. And that thing is kindness applied without knowing. 9 times out of 10, the person holding the baby bird, the fawn, the turtle, means nothing on earth but good, and the fawn dies anyway. So that was the middle of day 2. He built a shelter that was half right and half harmful, over a nest he had already damaged without knowing. On a piece of ground he was thinking about signing away. And I want to take 1 minute here before the storm, because there is somebody watching this who is going to find something in the dirt this year, and I would rather you heard this from a neighbor than learned it the way Michael did. If you turn something up in your ground and you do not know what it is, do these 4 things. Stop digging. Do not pick it up, and if you already picked it up, set it down exactly the way you found it and do not turn it. Take a photograph with your telephone from 4 feet away with something for scale beside it. A pocket knife, a quarter, anything. And then put the dirt back over it the way it was and walk off. Loose, dry sand or soil put back gentle is better insulation than anything you own, better than a tarp, better than a bucket, better than a lamp. Your ground has been incubating things for 10,000 years without your help. The single most useful thing your hands can do is stop. And if you want to run water off it, do what he did right. Cut a trench above it, uphill, and turn the water away. Never cover it. Never seal it. Air is the thing you are protecting, as much as the shell. If that is worth something to you, then subscribe, not for me, but because every one of you is another pair of hands keeping this door open. There is a whole generation of this knowing sitting in old people who are going to take it with them, and I am one man with one camera trying to catch some of it on the way out. All right, back to it. Because the front came through that night, it started about 9 with wind out of the southwest, and by 10:30 it was coming sideways. Michael was on the porch when he saw the light. A flashlight beam out in the field, low, swinging along the fence line, stopping, going on. He knew whose it was before his mind caught up with his feet. He went out through the wet grass, and he was angrier than the situation called for, which is what happens when a man has been holding something for 36 hours. "What are you doing out here?" he said. Douglas straightened up. The beam came across Michael's face and dropped. "Taking a look," Douglas said. "Storm's got part of my fence down. Figured I'd count noses before I lost one in the dark. You are 40 yards inside my line. I know where I am." They stood there in the rain. And Douglas said, "You are awful protective of a mud hole." And Michael said, "Stay off my ground." And Douglas laughed the short laugh that is not a laugh, and said, "Whatever you say, Michael," and walked off with the light bobbing. That is the whole of it. Nothing was thrown. Nothing was broken. 2 men in their 50s and 60s, standing in a rainstorm, being small at each other over a piece of ground, and neither one of them able to say the true sentence, which for Michael was, "I am frightened and I do not know what to do," and for Douglas was, "I would like to be asked for help one time before I die." Michael went back and checked the nest by feel in the dark, and then he stayed out there. He stayed out there all night. I asked him why, because there was not much he could do at that point. And he said, "Because if I had gone in the house, I would have had to lie to Delia again with my face in the light." 3.5 inches fell before 4 in the morning. The trench held. "That is the thing I want," said, because he did one thing genuinely right, and it is the thing that saved them. That shallow cut of a spade above the nest turned the sheet water off into the ditch, and the low spot never filled. The tarp, meanwhile, had gone slack and pooled and was holding a bathtub of warm water 8 inches off the ground, which he emptied at some point around 2 in the morning, cursing, in the dark, on his knees. By first light the rain had gone off east, and the sky opened up that scrubbed pale color it gets after. He lifted the edge of the tarp to look, and the shells had lines on them. Fine cracks, not one, but spidered across 4 of the 6, thin as the veins in a leaf. He thought for about 2 seconds that the storm had crushed them. Then one moved. Now, here is the natural history, and it makes what happens next matter. Those eggs went in the ground in the middle of May. About 130 days, which is on the long end but not out of the ordinary in a cool, wet autumn, because the sand is the clock, and a cool September slows the clock down. When the little one is ready, it does not peck like a chicken. It has a small hard point on the front of its snout, an egg tooth, and it works a slit, and then it rests. It may take a full day, sometimes 2, to come out, and while it is resting in there, it is pulling the last of the yolk into its belly through its underside. That yolk is its only groceries for the first weeks of its life. A person who sees an animal half out of a shell and helps it the rest of the way has just cut its supper off early, and the little one usually dies later on, and the person never finds out. Do not help. I will say it again in a minute. A hatchling gopher tortoise is about 1.5 inches across. Its shell is not hard. It is about like your thumbnail, and it stays soft for years, which is why almost none of them make it. The best numbers I have seen say something on the order of 94 out of 100 are gone before they are old enough to matter, and the ones that get them are raccoons, skunks, armadillos, crows, hawks, snakes, feral hogs, and worst of all, in that part of the country, imported fire ants, which will find a cracking egg and go into it. And the female that laid them will not be back. That is not neglect. That is the arrangement, and it has worked in that sandy country for a very long time, and it works on the arithmetic that she has 40 or 50 years of laying in her and only needs to win a couple of times. So Michael was standing over 4 cracking eggs at 6 in the morning with no sleep and a lie in his mouth, and the crows had already found him. Crows watch a man. He had knelt in that same square of ground 11 times in 2 days. And they had marked it, and there were 5 of them in the pecan at the edge of the yard, not doing anything, just present. And that is when he heard a truck, not the inspector's. That comes later, and it is not what you think. It was Douglas's old flatbed, and it came down the turn row and stopped, and Douglas got out, and his mother got out of the other side. Miss Verna Tanner is 88 years old. She lives in the small house behind Douglas's. She was born in that county in a year when a lot of people down there were hungry, and she taught school for 31 years, and she does not walk out to a field in wet grass at 6 in the morning for nothing. Douglas came up to the twine and stopped at it. He looked at the stakes and the ribbon and the tarp folded back and Michael standing over it with mud to his hips, and he said, "I have known you since we were 6 years old, and you are the worst liar in this county." And then Miss Verna came up behind him at her own pace and looked down past the both of them, and she said the word. She said, "Well, gophers, not a question." She said it the way you would say, well, biscuits, if you walked into a kitchen. And she got down on the ground, 88 years old, with her son holding one arm, and she looked at those 4 cracked shells for a long moment, and then she said something Michael has not gotten over yet. She said, "My daddy fed us on those in 1934. We called them Hoover chickens. There was a hole every 50 yards along that ridge back then, and we went along with a hook and a wire and pulled them out." And then she said, "There is not but the 2 holes left on this whole side of the road now. And one of them is yours." Michael told them, all of it, standing in the mud. The shovel, the book, the page, the number with the comma in it, the drawer with the papers in it, the 3 days, and Douglas listened all the way through without saying a word, which Michael said was the strangest part of the whole 3 days. And then Douglas said, "Is that what you have been doing?" And Michael said yes. And Douglas said, "You thought I would call the county on you." And Michael said yes. And Douglas said, "Huh." And then he said, "Well, I would have 4 or 5 years ago." Then he went and got the toolbox out of the truck. Now the law, because I promised it, and because it is the whole hinge of the thing, Michael's mother's book was printed in 1989. What that page was describing, near as anyone can work out, is the federal listing that came down in 1987, and that listing covers the western end of the animal's range over west of the Mobile and Tombigbee rivers, Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana. In Georgia, this animal is protected under state law, and that protection is real, and I am not going to soften it. You cannot take one, you cannot keep one, you cannot sell one, you cannot dig up a nest or fill in an occupied burrow. If you are grading ground to build on, there is a process, and you go through it, and it costs. But here is what that page did not say, because it could not, being 30-odd years old and written for a different purpose. Farming does not stop. A man who has been plowing a field for 20 years with tortoises in his fence-row can go on plowing it. Nobody takes the ground. Nobody comes and paints a line around your farm and tells you what you may do on the other side of it. There is no seizure of a family place because an animal chose to live on it. And in Georgia, there are people whose actual job is helping landowners keep both the farm and the tortoises. And there are programs, voluntary ones, where a man with good sandhill on his place can be paid to keep it that way and go on running cattle and cutting timber through it. Michael spent 3 days and one whole night in the rain, guarding a secret from a danger that was mostly made out of a paragraph in a dead woman's old book, and the ordinary human talent for filling a dark room with the worst thing in it. I am not laughing at him. I want that understood. I would have done the same. A farmer's fear of the government is not made up out of nothing, and every county has a story about a man who did the right thing and got a file opened on him for his trouble. But there is a difference between a fear you have looked at in daylight and a fear you have been feeding in the dark, and the price of the second one is always higher than you think. Which brings us to the third promise. He could not explain it, he could not share it, and now, the last of the three, he could not walk away from it. And the fact is, he no longer wanted to. They worked all morning, the three of them, if you count Miss Verna, and you should, because she sat on an upturned bucket under an umbrella her son held over her and told them what to do. They did not touch the eggs. They cut a second trench. They took the tarp off entirely and left it off, and that alone probably did more good than anything else that happened that day. They ran a length of 2-foot welded wire in a low arc around the nest, staked and pinned down flat to the ground on the outside, not as a wall but as an awkwardness, because a raccoon and an armadillo can both get past anything you build, but they will usually go around a thing that annoys them if there is easier eating elsewhere. They put a scattering of brush over the top of the run of grass between the nest and the fence row, so that a hatchling crossing open ground had a little roof over the crossing. And Miss Verna told them to look for ant mounds, and they found 2 within 20 feet. And Douglas walked back to his own barn and came with the granular bait and treated the mounds themselves, and only the mounds and nowhere near the nest. That is not a small detail. That is likely the single most effective thing done all week. Then Michael made the telephone call he had been avoiding for 3 days. He called the state, and he told a woman on the other end exactly what he had and where and what he had done to it, including the part where he turned 2 of them over, especially that part. She thanked him. That is what he said. He had rehearsed a speech about his rights and his family and his grandfather's lumber, and what he got was a woman who said, "Thank you for calling, and do not move them, and take the tarp off if it is not off already, and somebody will come look, and here is my direct number." The trucks came the next week, and they were not enforcement. 2 people with a measuring tape and a clipboard, and they walked the fence row and found not 1 burrow but 3. And they told Michael something he did not know, which is that a burrow, that shape and that size, has likely been in use, off and on, by successive tenants for longer than his house has stood. But that was the next week, and the hatch was that day. The first one came out a little after 11 in the morning. I am going to tell this part plainly because I do not think it needs any help from me. It was about the size of a silver $1.50, yellow underneath, the color of a good yolk, and the shell segments on its back had a soft ring at the edge you could see light through. It sat in the slit of its own shell for a long while, maybe 20 minutes, not doing anything, its head down. Then it came out the rest of the way in one motion, and it lay flat on the wet sand with its legs out. The 3 of them did not make a sound. The crows had gone off, on account of there being people in the field, and that is the last useful thing I will say about crows. It took about half an hour to gather itself. Then it stood up, and I mean stood, on all 4, up off its belly, the way a horse stands, which Michael said he had not expected at all, and which put a lump in his throat he could not talk past. And it went. Not fast. It went about 2 feet, and stopped, and went again, straight for the dark line of the fence row, straight for the grass, without one moment of doubt about which way was the right way, in a world it had been in for 90 minutes. Nobody touched it. Nobody carried it. Nobody put it anywhere. That is the discipline, and it is harder than it sounds when the thing is that small and the field is that big. 4 came out that day. The 5th came out the following morning. The 6th never opened, and when the biologist took it away later, she said it was one of the 2 he had turned. He asked, she told him. She did not make a lesson out of it, and she did not let him off either. Now I will tell you how it came out with the money, because if I leave that off, this stops being a true story and starts being a nice one. He did not get rescued. The note came due on the 15th of November, and he did not have it. He sold a tractor he had been keeping mostly out of sentiment and a peanut wagon, and he went in and sat down in an office and asked for 60 days and got it with a penalty on it. And the thing got paid in January, late, the way about half the farm debt in this country gets paid. He did not sign the solar lease on that 40. He wants me to tell you that he is not sure that was the right call financially, and that Delia is not sure either, and that they have talked about it more than once with the papers on the table between them. They are still talking about it. There is an appointment on the calendar with the state's landowner program to find out what, if anything, keeping that sandhill the way it is might be worth to somebody besides him. He does not know yet how that will come out. Neither do I. And Delia. He told her that evening, the whole thing, 3 days of it, at the kitchen table. And she was quiet a while, and then she said the thing that a good wife says, which is not what you would put in a movie. She said, "You did not think I would help you." That is the bill that came due out of all this, and it was bigger than the one at the credit association. He had 2 people 12 feet and 40 yards away from him who both knew more than he did. One of them, the woman he had married, and one of them an old school teacher who had known what that animal was since before the war. And he stood alone in a field for 3 days because he had decided in advance what they would say. And Douglas. They are not friends, I asked, and Michael would not claim it. But Douglas fixed his own fence that week, properly, for the first time in 2 years. And this spring he ran his own line and flagged 4 burrows on his own place before he brush-hogged. 2 men who cannot say a kind word to each other can still agree to move a bush hog around a hole. That is most of what neighboring has ever been. So here is what I would do different, and this is the practical part, and it is short enough to write on the back of a seed packet. If you turn something up in your ground that you cannot name, stop the machine and stop the shovel. Do not pick it up. If you already picked it up, put it back the same side up, and if you cannot remember which side was up, tell whoever comes that you cannot remember, because that is useful to them and a lie is not. Take a picture from 4 feet with something for scale. Put the dirt back loose, the way it was. If water is the danger, cut a shallow trench uphill and turn it away, and never ever cover the thing over with plastic, because you are protecting air as much as you are protecting shell. Do not water it. Do not warm it. Do not feed it. Do not help anything out of a shell, ever, no matter how long it is taking, because the taking a long time is the point. And then make the telephone call the first day instead of the third. Your state has a wildlife office, and it has a person in it whose whole working life is this, and I have yet to hear of one of them who was anything but glad to be called. Ask them, plain, on the phone, what does this mean for my farming? Ask it out loud, in the daylight, to somebody who knows the answer. You will nearly always find that the shape of the fear was bigger than the shape of the fact. And if you live in a town, or in a trailer, or in an apartment with a strip of grass and a fence, none of this is beyond you either. The same rule holds for the nest in the shrub by your door and the box turtle in the parking lot. Move a turtle out of a road in the direction it was already pointed and then leave it be. Do not take it home. Do not put it in water. The whole of the kindness is in the not doing. Now, the part I have been walking toward. Michael has been on that place 20 years, and his father before him and his grandfather framed the house. And in 20 years of running past that half-moon hole in the fence row, he had never once wondered what was down it. He owned that ground the whole time. He did not know it. I do not think that is a failing in him. I think that is most of us. A man can hold the deed to 100 acres and be a stranger to 99 of them. And the reason is not laziness. It is that the knowing that used to come with the ground did not come with the deed. Miss Verna knew what a gopher was because her daddy pulled them out of holes with a wire in 1934 when there was nothing else to eat, and she knew where every one of those holes was for 2 miles. That knowing did not get written down anywhere. Nobody wrote it down because everybody knew it. And then one day, nobody knew it, and a 54-year-old farmer had to look up his own field in a dead woman's book and got the answer half wrong. That is not luck, what Michael did out there. I have heard people tell this story like it was luck, like he happened to be a good man on a good day. It was not luck. It was that a man who had been given something looked at it long enough to see that it had been handed to him. And once a thing has been handed to you, you are a steward, whether you ask to be or not. That is the whole of it. You did not make the ground. You did not put the sand there or the sun over it. Somebody is going to have your place after you are gone, and they will inherit exactly what you leave in the dirt, the good and the empty both. So here is what I would like you to do this week, and it is not much. Walk your own place, not to work it. Just walk it. 45 minutes, no tools in your hands, and find one thing on it you have never looked at. A hole. A stump with something living in it. A wet corner you always mow around. And then find out what it is. Ask the oldest person you can get on the telephone. And if you do not know the oldest person on your road, that is your other job this week. And when you have got them on the phone, ask them this. Ask them what their people used to call the things on that land. Not the book name, the name their daddy used. Gopher, Hoover chicken. Whatever it is where you are, because that name is the last thread on the whole bolt of cloth, and when the last person who says it goes, it is gone for good, and no university brings it back. Then come tell me in the comments. Tell me what your grandmother called the animal, or the plant, or the weather in your country. The word that is not in any book. I want to read them. And tell me where you are listening from, because I get letters from Queensland and from Saskatchewan and from a woman in the north of Germany who keeps geese, and it does me good to know how far this porch reaches. I read every single one. And if you spent your working life at wildlife or at conservation or at a state office, and I have gotten something here half right, say so and say it plain. I would rather be corrected in front of everybody than have one of you follow me into a mistake. Next time I want to talk about the fence-a-row itself, the strip of rough ground between 2 fields that everybody has and nobody counts, and what a man can put in it and take out of it, and why the neatest farms are often the emptiest ones. The Lord bless you and keep you. Take care of the thing that was handed to you, whether it is a farm or a house lot or one word your grandmother said. And if we are spared and willing, I will see you at the next one. That is how the careful old folks did it. That is how it is still done in any farmhouse that remembers.